Well, it's one of the quirks of the game. You can be in this situation where there's no further information to be gleaned. There's just, are you going to run out of guesses before you run through the possibilities?
Yeah, I try to, when I'm stuck in something like that, I try to put in a completely new word with like 4 consonants in it, just so I can, cut them all off.
The other thing I'm noticing is the whole kind of, the word shape in terms of the vowel structure and what are the guesses that are going to eliminate the most possibilities.
Yeah.
On that front.
Do you remember what yesterday's was? Because yesterday had 2 E's in it, and it threw me for 6. I didn't know what.
I don't think I did it yesterday. Today was cater, right? Oh, sorry.
Cater? Oh, I haven't done it in a little while, to be honest.
It's okay. I missed it today anyway.
Should be careful.
My brother sends me the answer by a certain time every day anyway.
If you don't do it by then, you'll...
Exactly.
Yeah. All right, we are live. We are live with our second time of doing Lunch Zone, where we're doing Portal. I think we'll finish it up today, and then maybe we'll try out some of these bonus maps and build off of what we were talking about last week. I'm David Kutchik. I'm a PhD student in the English department here at UW-Milwaukee.
I'm Thomas Malaby. I'm professor of anthropology here at UWM.
And I'm Matthew Carricker. I'm a first-year PhD student in the anthropology department.
Awesome. You want to read the landing?
Oh, right. Let me pull that up. That was the one thing I did not prepare. But we will get it up and ready to go. I like how now, as I'm getting closer to the end, we have this cake in the background, which is fun.
There it sits.
All right, so our land acknowledgement. So we acknowledge that in Milwaukee we live and work on traditional Potawatomi, Ho-Chunk, and Menominee homelands along the southwest shores of Michigamme, part of North America's largest system of freshwater lakes, where the Milwaukee, Menominee, and Kinnickinnic rivers meet, and the people of Wisconsin's sovereign Anishinaabe, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Oneida, and Mohican nations remain present.
Right.
Awesome.
I just am loving this screen. I don't think I've ever taken a second to look at it. It pans back and forth, right?
Yep.
And you get the hose is moving slightly in the upper right. There's a flicker, which is you assume is the candle, or is it the fluorescent lighting? I just love the different things. You got the old school phone,
yeah,
and this sort of retro futuristic radio, but then you have like a flat screen TV and a mouse.
And the rotary on the phone is the aperture.
The logo.
And on the mouse, too.
Yeah.
Is it? And in fact, if you look closely, you can see it on the radio, too. There's a little bit of a detail.
Oh, yeah. There. That's cool, yeah. And I can't touch anything, or do anything. It just kind of pans on its own.
Right, like a security camera almost.
Yeah.
Totally.
Interesting.
It's also, is this a workspace? There's no windows, that brutalist architecture is evident in the concrete with the voids in it, and maybe even hints of circles.
If it is a workspace, then the cake is completely disturbing. Right. The chair is to the side,
right.
The keyboard is a sundae, and the cake is just in the middle, so...
Yeah.
I wonder what that means, but...
We haven't gotten to it. There is a cake that appears in front of us in the game. We'll get there.
We'll get there today.
Oh, right. I thought we were... Oh.
It could be fun at some point, maybe not next week, maybe a week after that, to do Portal 2 and do the co-op mode.
Yes. Ooh, that would be fun.
I said goodbye and you're like, no way. And I was like, I'm just pretending to be. That was great.
Is anyone there?
No.
Oh, that's happened to me.
It's because you didn't put down the second portal.
No, I did,
No,
but
it
I
just
wasn't
didn't
lined
line
up
up.
well.
Quite right.
And then I was off. We pretended we were going to murder you.
It's interesting. I don't know why I was thinking about death the other day, like death screens. Oh, because of your paper,
Right,
Matthew.
yeah.
But it's interesting how different games like represent like, oh, you died, right, or you like were squished, right. And in Portal, probably partially because of like just production wise, they couldn't afford to do too much fancy stuff. But like here, it's just like, oh, the screen turns red and you hear a crunch and that's about it.
Well, the first death screen I ever remember from my life was the GoldenEye on the Nintendo 64, when the blood would drip down the screen.
Oh,
That was
right.
always scary.
Yeah, I mean, there's interesting things like that. I mean, all the way back to Doom, right? The way that your face would get more and more bloodied and beat up, the more damage you had taken. You know, how one represents the physical damage.
And it's something that links straight back to TTRPGs, right? Because it was the idea of quantified hit points was taken right from analog tabletop games.
Yeah.
Ren is watching,
Hey, Ren.
and
Whoa!
they said that they would love to do some challenge levels or whatever next week. They'll be joining
I
us.
think that's a great idea.
That'd be awesome.
I don't remember this super fast.
Me
thing
either.
here.
Doesn't really seem to present any kind of
Yeah, maybe
unique
that's
challenge.
why. It's because I don't remember it because
You just kind of do the same thing.
This takes us back to explicit puzzles.
I gotta say too, have you any of you seen Galaxy Quest?
I have, but like years ago.
Oh, you know, there's so back in the old days of Star Trek, which it's a parody of, right?
Mhm.
There were all these, you know, you'd be in some weird place within the ship, and there would be all these pounding, rotating, smashing things, you know, and Sigourney Weaver's character is the one who says what we've all thought at one point or another, which is like, what is this? What does this
Like, what
even
are these
mean?
doing?
Like, you know, she's like, this episode was badly written. This is just, doesn't make any sense to have these things just moving back and forth. I do get a bit of that feeling here.
For sure.
Yeah, it's like why are these things just like gnashing into each other?
Right.
Right. But that does. Ooh, thank goodness I can't die from fall damage. That thinking about that though, right? It'd be interesting. The choice to basically like equip Shell with these boots that can withstand any pressure, when you fall, that really makes the puzzles a lot more fluid, right? Because like if you fail at a puzzle where you're supposed to like dive through a portal and then you'll shoot out, right, and you miss it, then you really you don't have to reload the screen, right? You don't have to go through all the motions again to get back to the puzzle. It allows for you to like it's a much easier way of like failure and then adjusting for failure.
Just speaking of this theme of death, why do we have this theme of death? We're heading into spring, but it does
I don't
remind me
know.
of, in Skyrim, the guy you can meet on the road is looking for the good death.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, what is a good death in a video game is what I hear you kind of raising.
Yeah.
Right? Is, the kind of something that would feel like an arbitrary death is sort of like, wait, why did I waste my time with that?
Right.
Yeah.
So the game designer has to think about things like, well, it has to be meaningful. This gets back to your paper, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is the death meaningful or not? And if it's not meaningful, then that's because the other things are shaping the meaningfulness of your experiences, like you're saying, like the length of your traversal.
It's because you're supposed to. The meaning is continual through multiple lives. That's why an individual one might seem like a stub.
Mm-hmm.
But to the point about fall damage here, it's interesting when you have those vertical puzzles, right? Which you need to be able to jump in particular ways, and then the closer you get to the top, failure, obviously the stakes increase with every bit you get closer to the top, because if you fall all the way down to the bottom, you have to go all the way back up again.
Mm-hmm.
And so you don't really need to kill the player as a consequence in those puzzles, because failure or failure is probably enough. Because then you just have to go and do it all over again. And jump puzzles are
You have to go back.
jump puzzles
That's
are a
blue.
staple. And then with the pounders that weren't part of a puzzle,
All right, here we
that
go.
also ties into the implicit, explicit puzzles as well, because I guess now we have to ask, is this a puzzle or is this just an environment?
Mm-hmm.
But
Right, and I think that question is interesting because, again, we kind of talked about it last week, right? All the other puzzles that are in the front, right? The testing chambers, right? They are just as constructed by the creators of the game as these puzzles are now. Right, but by presenting it differently,
Right.
it makes it feel like you're hacking into something.
Sure.
Even
Right.
though there really is only one way to get through all these environments, right? And
Totally.
that's the way the creators of the game want you to do it.
And in the earlier section, right, we had the GladOS and the game designer were kind of isomorphic in some fashion, right? But now that we're back here on GladOS, has been broken away from that. The game designer still exists, but there's also this shadow narrative figure, who the person who's drawn the arrows, right? Someone who's gone before, who writes help on the ground or whatever, right? So there's it. The game is so social in so many ways. It's surprisingly social, right? For a game where the only other body you ever see is yours, through a portal, and you see yourself, reflected. But I think it's partly because it's of the nature of puzzles, right? Puzzles, as I said last time, are wow.
Uh-oh.
Puzzles are they rely very heavily on that contingency of social guesswork, you and the designer. But this is elaborated in these other ways too, with the with all these different figures who stand for the other mind that you're supposed to be thinking about. Put me down.
Oh, there we go.
That was touch and go.
Yes. All right, let's try this.
Please put me down.
And there's I could have done some portals underneath them to send them away, but I like picking them up and throwing them. There's something more fun. Oh yeah, I forget you can pick up the turrets and just shoot them at each other.
Right.
Duh. But I know
forgot that too.
there's something so comical, it's like slapdash about just like throwing them, right? Like it reminds me of like Wile E. Coyote. A little bit.
I guess the social nature of the game too. We should think about the cube, and now these turrets, right, as these kind of anthropomorphized artifacts that are useful to you. You can manipulate, but which the game is aware that you can't have an interaction with something without having some moral quality to the relationship, right?
Yeah.
I just think that it's all done very well.
I'm trying to figure out how to get
Well, that
oh. Maybe I can. There we go. Oh.
I mean, in a way, of course, the game has been one big tutorial for where we are at now, because now you're thinking through Portal, and you can be put into a regular environment.
Top left of the shot. Oh, there we go. Thank you, Ren.
This is
Uh-oh.
an extended breakup.
there's a potential article to be written about how social this game is, the moral relationships that are
Transformed.
Yeah, and that are evoked, right? That either it assumes you are developing feelings for the cube, or certainly you are your feelings about GladOS are changing, and your feelings about this, anonymous person who went before are changing. All these different things.
Yeah, it's interesting because, like you're saying, right? It's very disembodied, just in the fact that there aren't a whole lot of bodies there, but it is so much about parasocial or social relationships, right?
Right.
I feel like a big part of that is because it's a big part of it's about institutions too, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like personal relationships as they are played out across institutions.
Oh, that's
you know.
smart. See, that's a Sally Falkmore comment right there. That's the highest compliment I can give. That's
Oh,
right.
thank you.
'Cause for her, this one of my favorite theorists. You should never ever think of institution and not think of the individuals who make it up and act for it. So I think you're exactly right.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Because it's like, right. It's about sociability, but it's also about how that social relationship is structured within these spaces, right?
Right.
So it's not only that you begin to care about the companion cube as an object, but it's because someone told you that companion cube was important, right? That's the first thing they tell you is like, this companion cube is going to help you solve these puzzles, and then structurally they do help you solve the puzzles, and that's the only reason. I shouldn't say the only reason, but that's the main reason why that kind of sociability between you and this object exists, is because it's kind of structured around this educational or institutional environment.
Reminds me of the article on dragon kill points that Crystal Lee Malone published years ago when she was in a progression rating guild in World of Warcraft, where the guild was the institution. There's also Blizzard's an institution. The guild is an institution on the scene that has a phone tree where she gets a call at like 2:30 a.m. and she better log in to the server because one of the world bosses has spawned and they have a shot at bringing it down, right? And how is that accomplished? How is that obligation produced? A lot of it has to do with the Dragon Kill Point system, which institutions, I think, are one of the reasons I think of her piece is it's good at demonstrating the ways in which institutions find a way to align your personal interest with the institutional interest, right? And that's another way of talking about the multiple themes of this game. What are your interests? GladOS is upset because you are not behaving in alignment with her institutional interests. So now you are a rogue actor, within that system.
And it makes me think about performative approaches to ritual as well, which emphasize, like you were saying, David, the way that things are spatially organized, and then from there how relationships are presented and patterned and performed based on that orientation. It's only because, well, one of the primary reasons is you shifting out of the
Press the button again, maybe.
the patterned order of this testing subject little process that your relationship to GladOS changes at the level of performance as well, because it's only because you're in this now extra cyclical space that your relationship to GladOS has broken down or transformed, and
I just have to go over here.
maybe there's something in you now playing this game without GladOS,
Right.
or against GladOS. But,
Yeah, right.
By the way, so that's speaking of just kind of last week we talked about scaffolding a little bit. So this is the first time beyond the turrets that I'm being attacked, right, by this rocket.
Right, yeah.
And the only way I can traverse this space is by using it, by using that rocket launcher to move throughout the space, right?
Oh, interesting.
And so that rocket launcher then comes back later, but this is our first time engaging with it in a way, and rather than using it, like I at first thought I had to attack the turret, right, use it to attack itself, when in reality I just needed to use it as a means of traversing the space. we'll see later that we use it to attack things. But right, the first thing they want you to do is learn how it helps you move through a space, which I think is an interesting way of
There's
introducing
a
something like
bifurcation
that.
where your alignment with GladOS in the institution of Aperture Laboratories is disrupted. There's a bifurcation, and then you end up being in alignment with this rogue other person. But all along, of course, you're in alignment with the institution of Valve, right? I mean,
Sure, yeah. Unless you're a speedrunner.
right.
Yeah, unless you're
right.
trying to do something else
or
with
there's
the game.
other ways, right? Unless there are ways in which you truly transgress in your play.
Hmm.
It does seem like you could, doesn't it? Is that a ceiling above there? No, huh?
Doesn't want to work. Ren, I might need your help again.
Encyclopedic knowledge of Ren.
Yes.
They're amazing.
I wonder. I don't think yeah, I can't. I was gonna say I don't think I need that rocket launcher anymore to do this, but I also am not sure how else I would do this. There's nothing I can really stand on, is there? No. Oof. It's interesting how, you have all these complex physics puzzles that once you kind of get them, they're fun, and you can fly through the air and do all this fun stuff. And now the biggest challenge for me is, like, figuring out how to jump up into a little air vent,
right,
right?
You can't stand on the tube that's above you that goes across? There's no room above it?
I don't
know. It looks like it's maybe ceiling right there.
Yeah. I'm just kind of scoping it out. I don't. Maybe. Whoop. Maybe I can attack that tube somehow, or break the tube. Aha! There we go. There we go. Alright.
But then another thing about death is that, it can be a bridge to consider then the game from the programmer's perspective. Since death, or a fail state has always been a point to restart certain things or to be the end of something, which has significance at the programming level as well.
I found it. I don't know if I can.
Right.
I was thinking about
Let me see.
the comment the programmers made with the speedrunners
Oh, I
about
can.
the choice to have the elevator be an object which moves through space rather than just it being a place the player goes into and then teleports to another location. And that's a choice they've made that's had consequences for speedrunners because it means that they can't actually get past. They can't slow down they can't speed up their play any more than the time it takes for the elevator to go up and down.
Yeah. So a certain class of constraints appear as different, as distinctive, only under the context of someone pursuing a speed run. That's interesting.
Sure.
Yeah, and those are constraints that weren't thought of or designed by the creators in that
they
way.
may not have thought that would make a meaningful difference to any gameplay because they weren't designing for the kind of transgressive gameplay of speedrunning. Of course, now game designers are designing with speedrunning in mind, I'm guessing.
Perhaps.
In many games, I would think.
Yeah.
Well, they certainly do other things, in terms of like having streamers in mind when they program games.
Right, exactly, yeah.
When it comes to the music, you can have a streaming
There's
mode.
the radio.
You take that with you.
Of course, I never realized it's 85.2 FM, and there are no radio frequencies that are on even digits.
It's also so short that it's off the end of the current spectrum, I believe. It starts at 87 or 88.
Oh.
Uh-oh.
Now I really need to be strategic.
Oh.
Diego's asking, am I doing a speed run? No, I am not. I'm sure. I wonder how. Right, because there are some speed runs where it's like, any percentage. There are some speed runs that are 100%. There are some speed runs that are any percentage with glitches. Some that are 100% with glitches. I would not be good at speed runs because so many of those speed runs, especially the ones that use glitches, you have to have such a pinpoint accuracy in terms of like when to move in a certain space or like how quick you have to do something, so then the computer doesn't know how to load, right? So then it loads something else, and for me, I don't have the finesse, or I don't want to learn the finesse, I should say.
It also takes a lot of repeated play to figure out these things in the first place, right? Or you have to do research.
Yeah, and usually that's why speedrunning has a big communal aspect to it, is because, right, it's all partially it's all about, I should say, it's partially about sharing resources, right? Oops.
Yeah, I'm getting more and more interested in developing a way of talking about play and playfulness that includes regulation, right? How do you sort of adopt these sort of regulatory moves to sort of work on something, get good at something, make something efficient, and at what point does it start to become a regimen and start to not be so playful anymore, right? Because it's not the regulation itself that makes something not playful, I think. It's when the procedure needs to be followed at the expense of experimentation.
Right, yeah.
Right? That's because you can experiment through regulation just as you can experiment through adjustment. But anyway, these are just the things I'm thinking about and have to talk to you at the end of the month.
So does that regiment lets you glimpse this other level of accomplishment or something softer, just things that can happen or things that can like could cooking be an example to think that through, At what point does playing around with a recipe...
You shoot it right now on the other end. There you go.
Diego's asking, is Thomas asking when does play become work?
Well, exactly, but not in the typical sense. I tend to shy away from those terms because they're so freighted that they tend to do. They're not reliable tools for us.
No.
But I am interested in institutionalization, right? So That can be, a group of people, a community, as David referenced before, working together on speed running, right? And that's a form of institutionalization that I think is very interesting. And in the course of that institutionalization, as a process rather than simply as when it ceases to be play and begins and starts to be work, there is regimentation, there's regulation. It's just like in World of Warcraft, instances versus raids, right? The 5-person instance where you want people improvising. You want people in a unique circumstance that may never occur again, saving the day so that you can get through that instance. But when you're in the 25 or 40-person raid, you don't want any freelancing. You don't want any hot dogging, even if it means that, yeah, even if someone hot dogging might have saved the day in that particular go through, they get punished maybe, right? Because you're supposed to follow the plan, and it's at that point where we could say it's become work, but I prefer to say a kind of a regimen and a set of strategic procedures have taken over the institutional interests and the Foucauldian way in which the institution's interest in making sure it itself is reproduced becomes more important than finding an ad hoc solution to a particular situation.
Sure, totally.
Here we are.
Mm-hmm.
Surprise for you. Deploying surprise in 5, 4. Time out for a second. That wasn't surprise. You see that thing that fell out of me? What is that? It's not the surprise. I've never seen it before. Never mind. It's a mystery I'll solve later.
By myself.
Because you'll be dead. Where are you taking that thing? I wouldn't bother with that thing. My guess is that touching it will just make your life even worse somehow.
And our incinerator's back.
Kidding me. Did you just set that aperture science thing, we don't know what it does, into an aperture science emergency intelligence incinerator? That has got to be the dumbest thing that... Whoa.
Smoother, more seductive, less
I
computerized.
figured out what that thing you just incinerated did. It was a morality core they installed after I flooded the enrichment center with a deadly neurotoxin to make me stop flying with a deadly neurotoxin. So get comfortable while I warm up the neurotoxin emitters. But
Uh-oh.
you've had some ancillary responsibilities. I can't shut off the turret defenses. Oh well. If you want my advice,
There's the rocket launcher.
Now I can use the rocket launcher.
trust me. It'll be a lot less painful than neurotoxin.
Hopefully this hits.
Well,
Nope.
because it's moving, you don't, because before the targets weren't moving.
Telling you I'm giving you good advice aren't mutually exclusive. The rocket really is the way to go.
Ooh, almost.
That thing you burned out isn't important to me. It's the full catalytic cracking unit.
There we go.
Nice job breaking it here.
Ooh, it's way
Oh.
up there. Is that a designed thing for it to go up there? See,
I
can't
don't think so.
remember.
It looks like a little glitchy.
What did I ever do to you? The difference between us is that I can feel pain. You don't do
The difference between us is I can feel pain.
I think you saw something burning.
Oh, I think you're doing some damage.
2 plus 2 is
In base 4. I'm fine.
Base 4, I'm fine. I let you survive this one because I was curious about your behavior. Well, you've managed to destroy that part of me. Unfortunately, as much as I'd love to now, I can't get the neurotoxin into your head any faster.
There we go.
Every opportunity to succeed, there was even going to
Where
be
did it go?
a party for you.
Bound.
A big party
Bounced
for you.
somewhere.
Bounce back into the.
Oh!
Invited you
Oh,
this
my.
Oh, it's way up there.
Thank you. Of course, he couldn't come because you were
And I'm
determined.
maybe the
Oh yeah, I'll have to.
Couldn't come either because you don't
We need
have
to
any
accelerate
friends,
over.
because of how unlikable you are. It's Processor right here in the person.
Oh, so
Oh.
close.
Okay, so I can jump. I forgot if the floor was something you could jump through. There we go.
That's exactly what it says. Very formal, very official. It also says you were adopted, so that's funny too.
3/4 cup vegetable oil.
About what happens after you die, right? Guess what?
Oh no!
Oh no! Oh.
You're
Okay,
going
let's
to
try
find
this
that
again.
firsthand before I finish explaining it, though, so I won't bother. Here's a hint. You're gonna want to pack as much room as you can in the next couple of minutes.
There we go.
Toxic. So deadly. Joking.
Kidding.
Oh, I said deadly neurotoxin.
It's sarcasm.
This stuff. Put it on cereal, rub it right into my eyes. Honestly, it's not deadly at all.
Alright, let's try and get this guy.
Oh.
He's gonna go a little farther up.
Oh,
Oh,
is it floating?
yeah. I'm trying to grab it. No.
It's supposed to float.
Ah,
Not that I ever recall.
maybe, maybe my,
It seems to be suspended with that green thing.
Yeah.
So,
Don't believe me?
oh no.
What if you stood on? No, I guess it wouldn't be close enough.
Unless I have to knock it down with the
Try that.
rocket.
Are you close enough underneath it? No.
Oh, there's no rocket.
Oh, and the time's ticking down.
I know, I got 2 minutes! Alright, let's try this again.
It's like it doesn't let you go while you're jumping.
Yeah.
Oh,
Hey.
No, I just had to jump,
Yeah,
knock
you-
into
yes.
it.
Okay, you can do this. Oh, nah.
Growl. Kind of like id, ego, and super ego. These
Right.
three, oops.
Sarcasm, save self-test complete. Stop scrolling and die like an adult or I'm going to delete your backup. I deleted it. No matter what happens, you're dead.
There we go.
I just struck you from the record.
Your entire life has been a mathematical error.
Tigo says speedrunning in Portal, at least from watching Devs react videos, is interesting because the glitches are unplanned contingencies but of an almost different kind. That can be said for any glitch involved in speedruns, I suppose.
Say what kind of contingency?
Unplanned contingencies.
Unplanned contingencies. Yeah, yeah. Which always creep in, right? Like the weather at a horse race track. You know, it's never. No game is isolable completely.
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the things that I attended Ryan House's talk last week about using board games in instruction, right? And he had mentioned that board games are a little easier to create your own rules for in a setting, right? Like, it's interesting how there are people who have created their own rules for video games, but it's less about using. It's less about it's something you can't really do by yourself within a specific amount of time, right? It seems like it's almost has to be this networked, or at least a couple of people really like hacking into the game to figure out, and usually it takes a while to find these glitches. So then, but then when you're playing a board game, it seems like it's almost a little bit easier to create your own rules with them.
This is something
In a
that I talked about in the in that talk that Ryan and I gave together, which is there hasn't been enough attention to the way in which the setup of offline games, the construction of the space, the manipulation of the objects is something that the players take on together, and it provides an opportunity for them to encounter the arbitrariness of it, right? The fungibility of it, right? Whereas in most computer games, there isn't anything like that kind of involvement in the architecting of the experience, right?
That's the end of the game. I escaped to the surface, but because of Black Mesa and everything happening in Half-Life 2, it's basically not a place I want to go to anyway. Outside's not really all that much better. Yeah. This is something I've just been thinking about teaching people or teaching systems, right? And how we can teach people how to manipulate systems. And it seems like TTRPGs or other kind of tabletop games, because that tactileness is there, right? It's something that you can physically see, that you can physically touch, that you can move around. It seems a little easier, I guess, in that sense,
Right.
to do it right,
agree.
like in the moment.
Yeah,
you know?
there's an anthropologist named Stephen Miller who wrote this piece I shared recently on with my students, Ends, Means, and Galumphing, an anthropological theory of play. And one of the things he's very interested in is the way in which studying children's play, there's this kind of the stumbling around, the experimentation that is very sort of physical and engaged, right? And he has this wonderful quote where he says, when the child grasps the marble, they're not just learning, I'm not going to get it right, but they're not just learning the properties of the marble, they're learning the properties of themselves holding a marble, right? So that there's a mutual construction of self in relationship to a physical object that involves your body in such a wide bandwidth kind of way that is not available, without a setup of all of the game materials, right, for games.
Yeah.
Whereas if you've got the deck of pandemic cards and you've got the little epidemic markers and you've got all these other things, it involves you in and puts you in touch with the range of practical possibilities they present in a way that a computer game has a harder time doing. That's what I take you to be saying.
Yeah, definitely. And Diego mentioned something too, that especially now that bug fixes are things in games, right, where say you've downloaded a game like, oh gosh, what was the really glitchy game? Cyberpunk. Right? It was super glitchy. It was unplayable for some, systems. And right now developers basically, they're doing all these day one patches, where they know glitches are occurring and they're being fixed retroactively or being added, right? Or balancing happens with fighting games or that kind of thing. And so it's interesting how some of the methods or ways that people mess with games, right? When you're able to mess with the object, that's being limited a little more now, as opposed to like Portal back then, or games from the PlayStation 2 era, because now there's an economic incentive to adjust and download patches and make people download these things before they can play them again. So that kind of limits some of that playfulness that you might be able to do. Whereas with a board game, right? They can't they can release different versions, but they can't really take away items you already have physically in your presence, basically.
So bugs have become a feature.
Yeah,
for the developers.
Because of online deployment and everything.
Yeah, like Diego says, it develops a different kind of dialogue.
Yeah.
Right? It's a different kind of relationship now that players have.
Well, and this points to something I think we've talked about before, just in general around the collab, which is the immediacy of governmental intervention through code, and how that changes the possibilities and affordances of governance. I can't log into some system in Milwaukee City Hall and change the width of all the streets by 8 centimeters, right? And it immediately becomes, or maybe an overnight, maybe overnight, it immediately, that doesn't happen, right?
Yeah.
But that happens in games, right? So that changes the relationship in these computer games, digitally mediated ones.
But I would say too, and I think this is the last note before we leave, because I gotta teach. Right, there are people now, and there are things you can easily download online where you can download. People have recreated the codes of games, So it's no longer that they have to like hack into an N64 cartridge to understand all the coding that happens in Legend of Zelda or Super Mario 64. It's that people have recreated the entire code for these games,
Right.
which makes them much more the things that people can like adjust and like it's modding in an actual way where you go in and change the code of the actual game.
So just one more plug. There's a great piece by Ron Eglash on appropriating technology, 3 different levels of appropriating technology. That's the 3rd level of appropriating technology, where you are actually sort of in the thick of it, in the mechanics of it, in the re-architecture.
Yeah, and it seems like to me, the closest thing you would get to using a board game and playing it in a different way would be getting the code. Like, that's the closest thing I could think of to the physical object, right? That's the closest thing you get to the light that is required, or the heat, the heat and the energy that's required to operate these things. Anyway.
That was fun, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.